Maybe you could start off by telling us a little bit about the design direction for this, what looks like a facelift, but certainly is more extensive than a generic facelift. Also, the objective. I mean, what sort of is it a mid-model modification? Is it something that you want to use as a platform to communicate to your buyers? What was the objective and the design direction?
So this is the new Nexon. It's a very significant facelift. As you can see, it's more than the usual scope. What we wanted to do was we wanted to obviously modernize the Nexon, which is our most successful model, and at the same time upgrade it and sort of catch the spirit of where we think this segment is going. So we were always using the term, more digital. So from a surfacing design language, much more integrated. It's more of a high-tech product. It really is like communicating the capability. It still has to be a strong SUV, sweet spot in the market, but at the same time, really communicate this fact that it's almost like a consumer electronic product now.
In terms of its the way it looks, I do see that there is a mix of character and design lineage that's coming from multiple models. So how do you strike this balance between sort of individualism for a model versus a family lineage, and how that can work?
That's actually very important. The Nexon has to have its own character. It has to stand out in the range. To be honest, we were working on this product as well as others like the Curve, Sierra. Those are all models that are in the design studios, all at the same time, different timing plans. To be honest, we did have moments where we looked at some of the products and we thought they're too similar. Many of them at the same time gives you the opportunity to review them and to see, are they starting to become all sort of the same, generic look, or do they actually have their own character? So there was actually instances during the development of this Nexon where we felt like, probably is it getting too close to Curve, or is it getting too close to Punch or whatnot? So that's part of the design, always strategic development.
Right. The Nexon has been around for a while now, and it's a vehicle that is so prominently visible on our roads. So has some of these changes come through organically, or has it come through because of customer feedback? Has there been a need for you to reposition the model in terms of its overall impact on the road?
Yeah, from a design point of view, it's now a 10-year product. The concept was done almost 10 years ago. And then design worked on translating the initial concept into the first production car. So to be honest, it's always been one of those models that's constantly being re-looked at, re-evaluated. And obviously its success has grown over that 10-year life cycle. So for us, it's almost the backbone to the portfolio. So we're constantly looking at who's buying the product, where do we see an opportunity to grow it from a customer segment point of view, but also from a technical point of view as a proposition. One of the elements, I think it's quite obvious, is we wanted to really give it a premium appeal. We really felt, even though the price is very competitive and it's a mainstream product, but the impression, especially on the interior, that it's much more affluent, much more quality focused. So there was a big emphasis done on fit and finish. There was a lot of editing. If you look at just from a design point of view, every line, they do sort of line up in terms of symmetry. And also the gaps are now very tight. Same with the rear, the X Factor, what used to be a trim piece, it's very mechanical, looking, and some of the gaps are, quite large by today's standard. So as we were renewing it, we said we need to tighten everything up. The customer has, much higher expectations now. Doesn't matter what price point the car is, but the market is very sophisticated nowadays. So you really have to meet those expectations and not disappoint.
Can you sort of get down to some of the examples? I do see some influences from your EV design direction that you've showcased. I see some influences from your need to integrate this with some of the models higher up in the hierarchy.
That's right.
So can you talk us through some of the elements that have made those changes?
Well, to be honest, like you said, obviously we're always looking at it, as well from an EV point of view. This is obviously the ICE version, but when we're designing them, we obviously consider both aspects of it. So it's all done simultaneously. And then from a portfolio point of view, for instance, the lamps, the investment we made into these LED lamps, that's a lamp unit that will be used on as many models as possible. Before, for instance, each car had its own lamp system, its own steering wheel, things like that. And now what we're doing is we're creating much more consistency across the portfolio, but you still have to obviously segment them in terms of price, size, and so forth. So for instance, the corporate steering wheel, the one we previewed on the curve, this is now the production version, but you'll see this theme, essentially across the portfolio. Same with the lamp layout and things like that. So it's being strategic, and that allows us then, because we're sharing certain components across the portfolio, that allows us to spend money in other areas and give a much more value proposition to the customer.
Why should there be such a dramatic difference? I mean, if I can sort of position this question in a little later in context, but why should there be such a dramatic difference between ICE and EV? I mean, essentially, it is the same mobility product that's being offered with a different powertrain.
Yeah.
If you really look at it from a very simplistic viewpoint.
For this current generation, where the products are bridging it, like, it's the same platform that's offering an ICE and an EV variant, you do need to show differentiation. First, you need to justify the price tag. So you can't have just the same car and it's a powertrain choice. The other thing is EVs lend themselves to being, more aerodynamic. For efficiency is the key byline for EVs. So you need to communicate efficiency. The third aspect is, for instance, if I look at the front of this car, the ICE version needs more cooling, just from a radiator point of view. The EV needs far less. So I'm always, as a designer, form follows function. So I don't want to have an unnecessary intake. So for instance, this mid intake here, as an example, is really not necessary on an EV version. But at the same time, I don't want to have the EV version which just has that plugged in. It's this kind of superficial grille. So it offers the opportunity to have slight differentiation. Once we get into Gen 3 EVs down the road, like the Avinia, which is just a pure EV, then that you don't have that issue.
So a born electric platform would give you much more.
Oh yes,
freedom.
definitely. When we designed the Avinia, it was literally a white sheet of paper. It's this skateboard. You don't have the traditional sort of layout. The batteries are the fundamental area, and then you can position the wheels where you want them. To be honest, the farther the wheelbase is, the better the range, because you can package more batteries in it. That car was born from the package where we said, okay, we move the wheels out, and then we realized that for a 4.4 meter vehicle, we have the interior space of a 4.6, 4.7 meter vehicle. Then the perception of the interior is really valued. The silhouette was actually born from making the interior as big as possible, physically and perception-wise. You wouldn't be able to do that with a platform which is bridging both an EV and an ICE powertrain.
Right. Just a little bit about the cabin again, and in the context of a changing sort of taste and preference in the Indian buyer segments. Would you think that we've come to a sort of inflection point where buyers are willing to pay more for a more premium finish, are willing to pay more for tech?
Yeah.
And since the Nexon is, of course, one of the pioneers in its segment, is there this need to keep it abreast of the others?
Yeah, I mean, definitely the customer values that premium, the tech, the sophistication, the quality, something that we're offering with this interior. And then they can basically spec it up. There's a base Nexon. I mean, we do have the personas now, so they can choose the persona, but the persona also reflects, you can then spec it up in terms of packs, so in terms of size of screens, in terms of fit and finish and things like that. But ultimately, the core of the product, which is the instrument panel, if you notice, like the vents and the execution of the plastics and everything like that, all versions are very premium now. And I think the customer now really quite expects that. They're just very sophisticated now.
Going back to that contextual point about EVs and ICE, I'm sure you've looked at BMW's announcement about the new class.
Yes.
And it's such a huge departure. I mean, is that what would your take be if you were to be, taking that call? I mean, it's such a huge departure from the brand identity of the past.
It is, but I think it's actually a very good call. I think it very much captures the right direction, both for brand and for the market. So to be honest, I mean, I saw it just recently in the news, but I thought it was a very good direction. I think, I mean, like all of us, I mean, when we're designing a car, we are designing the experience. That's how you interface with the car, but also we're designing the brand. And it's very important that you have this helicopter view of how this, for instance, this model plugs into the range, how the customer sees the range, And then how do you see it, whether it's ICE or EV or born EV in terms of an Avinia? How do those puzzles fit together? Keep it simple. The customer really needs to have a very easy to understand storyline, narrative. If you make it too complicated, too overthought, they will disconnect. So it's just like using the screen. You don't want to read the manual. It should be intuitive. And just like that, the brand experience needs to be intuitive. You should automatically understand when you enter a showroom or a dealership how that works in the ecosystem, how these products work in that brand experience, and etc. So, like I said, simplicity is always the key.
Yeah. But at the same time, I mean, doesn't it give you the jitters when you look at brand identity? You've got to look at futurism, you've got to look at costs.
That's part of the job spec, to be honest. The designer's role is not just being a stylist, to make the car look attractive and obviously, viable as a product and feasible. But our job is, as designers, to work with the platform, for instance, and engineering, defining the parameters. So at the beginning, ergonomics, size, scale, I mean, we're very much integral to that. But also our job is to be almost a weather vane in terms of futurists. Car designers, many of them, studied other aspects of design, and we just have an inbuilt curiosity. We're always living in the future. To be honest, looking at this car was interesting now over the last day, because we did this 2 years ago.
Yeah.
This work. So my headspace is actually way beyond this. If you walk into the studios now, any of the three, I mean, it's a snapshot of 2026, 7 right now. And so being futurist is part of the job spec. We constantly are looking at trends, not just automotive trends, any trend, technology trends,
Right.
or social trends, how are we going to be using technology and things like that. So it's kind of built in. It's a natural reflex for any designer.
And all of that has to be global too, not just...
Oh, yes. I mean, all of our products, we design them as if they're global products, and we have a very international team. We have Europeans working in Pune. We have Indians working in the UK and Italy. We have 12 nationalities, 180 people in design, working nonstop, each one specializing in maybe their own area. That system is broken down into very specific skill sets. But at the same time, they are all communicating, and all of those ideas are germinating and coming up with basically these proposals.